Hey guys, it's Nicole. Welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be chatting to you about the books I read in January. Let's get right into the books I read. We'll start off with An Enchantment of Ravens, which is actually the book I finished in January last, but I want to talk about it here because my thoughts are still quite fresh. I did not like this. I do feel like a little bit of a hypocrite for having read this because in my unhaul videos there were a whole bunch of books that have fairies or fae, and I unhauled those books saying that I didn't like them and didn't plan to keep them because they are about fairies and fae, and I'd read them and fairies just seemed to not be my kind of thing. There was something about this book that I really wanted to hang on to it and give it a chance. Like, this was almost in the unhaul pile. Needless to say, I will probably be unhauling this down the track whenever I do another unhaul later on in the year, because I didn't like it that much. This story follows the main character Isabel, who is a painter, and she lives in this small village, and the way this world sort of works with humans and fairies is humans have craft, and I did really love how they spoke about craft. Craft is anything from painting to cooking to having textile abilities, and the humans in this world make their craft and exchange what they've made with the fairies for enchantment. And the fairies will enchant the humans' houses for protection, or they might enchant their animals in certain ways so that they're producing like milk or eggs a certain number of times of the year so that the humans have food. So I did really like the talk of craft and just like humans' abilities. It was really talked about in a way that it was humans' own sort of magic. So Isabel, our painter, she typically paints portraits, and she has all these fairies come visit her and she paints their portrait. Then one day the Autumn Prince comes to her village and he requests that she paints his portrait, and she does, but she paints human sorrow in his eyes, and that's seen as like a huge crime, basically as an embarrassment, because why would a fairy want to have human emotion? Like, there's this whole thing that they don't have human emotion. So he comes to her house and collects her and is like, you have to come to the autumn court with me and await your trial to decide your punishment. And she doesn't have much of a choice in going, because she does have an aunt that she lives with and like two adopted sisters who, if she refuses to go, will be putting them in danger. So then we're following her, following this Autumn Prince off to the Autumn Court, and that's the plot. While I was reading this, I was trying to analyze what it is about fairies I don't like, because I love supernatural creatures. Fairies have, since I was very young, been the ones I never have enjoyed the books of. There's always just been something missing, and I kind of realized that I think part of it is they're all the same. The magic and the lore of fairies, how they can't lie, how they're still manipulative even though they can't lie. They're all very young and beautiful. They're all the same. Whereas when you have vampires, I feel like every vampire book has their own different unique lore, and you don't always know if the vampires are good or evil, or if they have some sort of magic system. And I find that really fascinating and really fun. The main thing about this book that did not work for me was I did not like the characters. They fell extremely flat. I thought they were very boring. I thought they were kind of inconsistent too. Like, we're constantly informed about how fairies don't have emotions and stuff, but then they do things that are humans' emotions, like they fall in love. And I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. It's contradicting itself, and it got a bit annoying. A huge chunk of this book, I would say, is like Isabel and the Autumn Prince traveling through the forest. And I think it would have worked if these characters had better banter, but they just spent so much time staring at each other. And I just was not interested. So I gave this book 2 stars. I don't think I'm gonna read more books about fairies, or I think there's one other series I almost unhauled that I didn't. The only time I can think when I do like fairies in books is when they're like meddling, like when they're not main characters or when they're not the love interest of the main character. I tend to like them, but otherwise I just find they're the same and I don't find them to be particularly interesting to read about. So yeah, starting on a negative note, but wanted to get my thoughts out of the way for this one because this was the last book I finished. So I then also completed 5 volumes of Bleach in January. So I read volumes 5, 6, 7, 8 and 9, so I'm now up to volume 10, and I love this series. This is a series I read a little bit of the manga of when I was younger, and I've watched like pretty much all the anime. I just haven't watched the most recent anime. I love this story so much. We essentially follow a teenage boy called Ichigo who has had the ability to see ghosts since he was very, very young, and one day he meets a Grim Reaper, and this Grim Reaper, due to circumstances, loses her magical abilities, Grim Reaping abilities, and passes her abilities to Ichigo. While she's stuck in the human world, he takes on her Grim Reaping duties, so which is essentially going around and killing the evil spirits called Hollows. That is the start of the story, but it goes into so much more. Where I'm at currently, they have entered Soul Society, which is the world where all the Grim Reapers live, and I love it. I love the magic system, I love the world, I've always loved anything to do with ghosts and Grim Reapers. I find it so fascinating. I love all the characters. Where I'm at now in the story, I'm getting reintroduced to all the characters in Soul Society, so like all the other Grim Reapers, and I'm loving it. I don't rate manga, I just kind of want to read it for enjoyment, not to like think about it and like analyze it. But yeah, I love it. If you haven't read this series, like I highly recommend it. The first book I actually finished this year was Girls of Paper and Fire by Natasha Ngan. This is the first book in a YA fantasy series, trilogy actually. We follow our protagonist Lay, who at the beginning of the story is taken away from her home and forced to be a paper girl for the king, so essentially a concubine of sorts. She has no choice, she has to do this because if she doesn't, then she puts her family at risk. So we follow Lay and the other paper girls at the court, learning the way of the court, learning what it's like to be a paper girl, but also what happens when they stop being paper girls, because they're not paper girls for a lifetime, they're only paper girls for about a year or so, and then the king will get a whole bunch of new paper girls in, so they will have to go off and like serve other military figures and nobles at court, but they've got to make sure that they like do well as a paper girl in order to ensure their safety in the future. It's difficult to talk about because it's one of those books you don't want to say you enjoyed, because it's not typically a book you read for enjoyment. It's really a book that is quite terrifying and explores like very heavy topics. I did really like how this book showed the different ways in which the paper girls found themselves becoming paper girls, but also how they reacted to their circumstances. Like there was one of them that had been raised from childhood knowing that this was what she was going to do, and then like Lay, she was taken. So there was all these different like scenarios, which I thought was a very interesting character study on each of these girls. I gave this book I think like a 3.5 stars. So I did really quite find the characters interesting, and then Lay ends up having a little bit of a romance with one of the other paper girls, which was a really nice like scenario for her to find love in such a scary situation, and like also finding comfort with this other girl, which I really enjoyed. But something I will say is I kind of wish that this was a standalone. I'm hesitant to continue on with the series or the trilogy because to me, I think this could have just ended. I don't see how it's going to expand another 2 books. I don't really think there was much story for that. I liked that this was such a contained story within the court, and contained also in terms of focusing on the girls. Having said that, I do think I will probably end up giving the other books in the trilogy a go at some point. And then the last novel I completed in January was When You Trap a Tiger by Keller. This is a middle grade story, and we follow Lily, who with her mother and older sister, they are going to go stay with their Harmony, her grandmother, and we quickly learn that her Harmony is sick. This is mostly a story about grief and family. I loved it because it has that trope of a grandmother telling the younger generation, the children's stories. So there's a lot of like mythology in this book, particularly mythology about tigers, which I adored. It was very magical. It was very heartbreaking. I think what I loved most about this was the writing. It has that very enchanting and wondrous sort of middle grade writing. Lily describes herself as having superpowers, and her superpower is that she is invisible. The way she talked about her superpowers and other people's superpowers really described what kind of people they were. It touches on themes of like parents and children being separated. We do get a little bit more information about her harmony and what it was like for her growing up and leaving Korea, and how she was separated from her mother. It touches on like the meaning of stories, and I just think it was beautiful. I just, yeah, really recommend this. It made me cry multiple times. And I think I just picked this book up at a time I really needed it. I think it's a beautiful story, and one that we can all relate to, because unfortunately we all do lose grandparents at some point. The next two books I'm going to talk about are books I haven't completed. One I've put on pause for now, and that is Silver Under Nightfall by Chupeco. I picked up the audiobook of this, and basically I really just did not like the audiobook narrator. I just found it was stopping and starting to the point that it was distracting, and I found a lot of the voice narration for the female characters, because it is a male narrator, that he was doing pretty much the same voice acting for all the female characters, and I couldn't distinguish them. I only got about 6 chapters in before I decided I was going to put this on pause until I could find a physical copy or an ebook copy. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to find access to either yet because my library doesn't have it and it's not on Scribd here, so down the track maybe I'll get to this. But this story essentially follows our vampire and monster hunter Remy, who comes from a family who have been hunting vampires and monsters for generations. He is a Damthia, so his mother was turned into a vampire when she gave birth to him, so he has like extra abilities that are very like vampiric in nature, so he can hear people's heartbeats. He's got a little bit of extra strength. At the beginning of the story, he is tasked with killing this newly turned vampire, and he kills her, and then he sort of is questioning whether he should have, like whether she was actually going to be evil or not, but he did so on the orders of his father, so he doesn't fully trust his father. That's kind of all I got. There is a whole sort of thing with all different vampire courts and houses, which I missed, to be honest. It kind of went over my head, a lot of the world building and lore, just because I was struggling to follow this audiobook. So if I do ever start this again, which I really do hope to, because it does really intrigue me, I think I will restart from the beginning, because I'm pretty sure I've heard there's a poly relationship in this, which is why I was intrigued and wanted to pick it up in the first place. And then the last book I have to chat to you about is an audiobook I'm listening to, and that is The Comeback by Lily Chu. I'm not entirely loving this book, but to be honest, it's the audiobook I listen to when I want to play my Switch. This story follows our main character Ari, who is a lawyer, and she is such a hustler with her job and is determined to be like the best of the best. She one day comes home and her roommate's cousin has decided to stay with her, and her roommate is like out, so it's just like the two of them, and then it does end up being like a romance between them. I just think this is fine. Like, maybe I should DNF it because I'm not like loving it. I really liked Lily Chu's first book, The Stand-In, and I was excited for this. What I loved about The Stand-In was there's a really beautiful like female friendship that forms, and then there is a romance, but I would say that happened very much towards the end of the story, whereas this romance developed very early on. It just happened. Like, I wanted to get to know these characters more before it happened. So yeah, I won't talk about that one too much more because I will probably finish it maybe in February, so you'll get my final thoughts on that. I'm gonna end it here. Thank you so much for watching. Please put a flower emoji in the comments section if you've made it this far. I hope your January reading went well. Let me know what your favourite book was if you had one. Otherwise, thank you for watching, happy reading, and I'll see you next time.